Well, radio was the thing that you had on when you were home doing the ironing, and a lot of women were doing that. Radio was the thing you had on when you were driving in your car. Radio was the thing you had on at work.
In the 1950s, the Lehigh Valley listened. Radio was big.
And what I remember were two stations that were real standouts. One was WAEB, which had the rock and roll audience, kids my age during that time period. And the other station was where my father worked, and that was WKAP. He had a program that was pretty well known called Open Mic. Open Mic was one of its kind at that time. It was the first, to our knowledge, the first live, on-the-air audience participation show. Well, being a minister as well as a radio personality, he really brought a different component to the whole radio show. And that was when somebody had maybe a neighbor that ran out of coal or had kids who needed coats, they would call my dad on the air and say, hey, you know, we know of somebody who needs some help. Is there something anybody can do out there?
If I was around, Vern would have me come in because people might ask a question or something in the news in reference to local government. What was the reasoning behind it? When it came budget time, they were complaining about the taxes. The same way with schools. Why do they have to give the teachers so much money? Why this? Why that? We used to get the farm agent to come on Open Mic, and they could talk about anything from trees to flowers. And, I mean, the phone lines would be burning up.
I think my dad set a tone and set a tone of really connecting with people. And that sense of community that he could build over the air was carried out into the whole Allentown community and Bethlehem and Easton. It was one of the first times that media was used to bring people together. That was very unique.
Use Ajax, boom, boom, the foaming cleanser. Boom, 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 boom.
In the 50s, people listened, but they soon began to watch.
Well, I think the one appliance which really had the biggest effect was television, and television really came of age in the 50s.
You could always pick out the homes that had television because they had the antennas on the top of their roofs.
And then, of course, you had this pattern that would come up on the screen, and then we had the antenna on the roof, and then we had one of these boxes that you had to rotate the antenna in order to get a station in right. And my father was always turning this thing and rotating it just a little bit this way in order to get a program in, you know.
Cable was just starting to grow from its original starting points here in the area. You got 3 channels. You got Philadelphia, you got 3, 6, and 10, which were the 3 networks. And that was basically it.
The pictures that we had in the 1950s were not nearly as clear as we see now. There was what we call snow in the picture, but people still enjoyed to see the picture.
Kleckner's Appliance was one of the first stores to open on MacArthur Road, and on one cold, snowy night, TV sales were hot.
In November of 1956, we ran the first truckload marathon sale in the Lehigh Valley. We ran it for 24 hours. We sold 120 TV sets. We had people coming in at midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, and we had a blizzard outside.
The neighbors had a television set much before we did, and we thought this was something that we never would have. And then one day my father came home with a friend, and they carried one into the house, and we thought we were in heaven.
We were so mesmerized by it that we would wheel it from the dining room into the archway so we could eat supper and watch TV.
We would have an indoor picnic on a Saturday night while we watched the Abbott and Costello show and the Honeymooners. And that's when we'd have deviled ham sandwiches and olives and soda and pretzels and chips. It's something that we normally did not have, but on a Saturday night, that was a special treat.
It was a big thing from growing up listening to radio and using your imagination to now seeing it. It was quite the thing.
Yes, I had a poodle skirt. I was only in 5th grade at the time, but I was very cool. I had a poodle blouse as well that I remember it said very specifically, "Love me, love my poodle."
Crew cuts were as popular, depended on what social circle you were in.
I wore saddle shoes. I preferred the penny loafers, though.
Teenagers in the 1950s had a look all their own, and they danced to a new sound.
Just let me hear some of that rock and roll music.
Oh, I loved it. I loved it. The first record I bought when I was 13 was Great Balls of Fire. My father had a fit. He thought it was, decadent.
Goodness gracious, great balls of fire.
And I could always remember, first going down to Melody Music House, which isn't there anymore. It was on South 3rd Street in Easton, or buying 45s, or if I really wanted a good record, and going up to Speedy's up on Hamilton Street in Allentown, who had everything. If you were into rock and roll, you wanted to go to get the records, you went to Speedy's.
Watching the Ed Sullivan Show and seeing Elvis Presley on the show, dancing and gyrating, and just totally different than anything we've ever seen on television before.
Love me.
My very first 45 was Love Me Tender. That was my very first 45, was in Elvis.
Let me go.
And I think, like all teenagers, is because the adults didn't like it, we liked it. They called it noise, and they couldn't relate to it. But we could get in with the beat. It helped you release the energy you had, both with the dance and the music.
I thought it was great. I remember going to the movies and seeing Rock Around the Clock with the Bill Haley and the Comets.
We all watched American Bandstand. We got to see new recordings right away. Dick Clark just seemed to manage it all, but everybody watched it. And then we talk about it the next day.
While Philadelphia had American Bandstand, in the Lehigh Valley, teenagers could rock around the clock at the bandstand at Notre Dame High School in Bethlehem, hosted by DJ Gene Kay, and at Castle Garden at Dorney Park in Allentown, broadcast on WAEB with DJs Kerm Gregory and Jay Sands.
Castle Rock was synonymous with Castle Garden. The kids used to say, "Hey, you going out to the Rock tonight?" We used to have anywhere from 800 to 1,000 kids there on a Saturday night.
Amazing. Lights, the music was great. It looked like they had aluminum foil on the ceiling to help reflect the light.
At Castle Garden, teens could also see recording stars perform live on stage.
And we had like Paul Anka, Ned Funicello. The kids would go screaming and hollering and carrying on, And not so much to dance, but just to see the person. And then if they're nice enough to and had the time to get an autograph, man, can you imagine the conversation in school the following week?
Drive-ins were popular in the 50s, like Becky's in Berlinsville and Shankweiler's in Orfield, which bills itself as America's oldest operating drive-in theater. Another popular place to go on a Saturday night was the Ritz Barbecue in Allentown.
And we were very lucky back then because there were places where we could go to and sit there for hours and put some money in the jukebox and listen to music and just talk.
Cruising was also a sign of the times for teenagers in the Lehigh Valley in the 1950s.
We cruised to both Allentown and Bethlehem and would go as far up Northampton Street as you could, then go down to the circle and go around the circle and go right back up again and do the same thing on Hamilton Street.
No particular place to go.
Pre-mall Hamilton Street, when it was a lot wider than it is today.
When you went down Hamilton Street, you were there to look cool. So one part of the cruising was to see how fast your car was. The next part, when you start coming down Hamilton Street, was how cool you looked, and to get the girls to look at your car.
The girls from Allentown, we would cruise over to Bethlehem and meet Bethlehem boys, and the girls from Bethlehem, I would assume, were all cruising over to meet Allentown guys. So we all...
The music and the times would change as America entered a new decade of turmoil, assassinations, and war, leaving behind memories of a slower, simpler life in the Lehigh Valley.
I don't think most kids in the 50s had any idea what was going to happen in the next 10 or 20 years.
So right